It wasn't the sound of the key in the lock that afternoon that shattered Eleanor Vance's world. It was the silence that followed. 15 years of marriage, a billion-dollar empire, a name that echoed in the halls of finance and philanthropy, all of it built on a foundation she thought was granite. But that day, her husband, Julian, didn't just come home. He brought with him a wrecking ball in the form of a demure, young, and very pregnant woman. What follows isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of what happens when a queen, pushed from her throne, decides to burn the entire kingdom to the ground. The Vance estate in Bel Air was less a house and more a monument to success. Sprawling over 2 acres of meticulously landscaped hillside, the Italianate mansion was a testament to Julian Vance's Midas touch. From the outside, it was a fortress of limestone and glass, reflecting the golden California sun. Inside it was a museum of a life perfectly curated. Eleanor Vance, its elegant chatelaine, was the curator. For 15 years, she had played her part with flawless precision. She was the woman on Julian's arm at the Met Gala, the gracious host of fundraisers that raised millions for esoteric causes. The silent partner whose sharp intellect had, in the early days, been the scaffolding upon which Julian built his real estate empire, Vance Global Properties. Her background in architecture wasn't just a quaint hobby mentioned in Vanity Fair profiles. She had designed their first 3 lucrative commercial developments before gracefully stepping back to build their home and social standing. Their life was a meticulously choreographed ballet. Mornings began with green juice on the terrace overlooking the city, the air smelling of night-blooming jasmine and money. Julian would depart in a cloud of Tom Ford cologne and quiet authority, chauffeured in his black Bentley. Eleanor's day would be a whirlwind of appointments, fittings with designers, meetings with the Vance Foundation, board calls with caterers and event planners. She was the CEO of their private life, and her performance was worth every one of the millions Julian's name was attached to. Their friends, a constellation of old money and new tech billionaires, saw them as the ideal. The Lockwoods, the Astors, the Chengs. They all admired the Vance partnership. Eleanor is his secret weapon. Michael Astor once slurred affectionately over a glass of 25-year-old Macallan. She makes him look presidential. And she did. She softened his ruthless corporate edges, gave his ambition a respectable, philanthropic face. She chose the art on the walls, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there, not just for its value, but for the stories they told, stories of passion and turmoil contained within a neat, expensive frame. Much like her own. The cracks, of course, were there, but they were hairline visible only to Eleanor. They were in the late-night calls Julian started taking in his study, the door firmly closed. They were in the newfound obsession with his phone, its screen angled away from her, with a casualness that was painstakingly deliberate. They were in the subtle shift in his touch from possessive and passionate to perfunctory and distant. Eleanor, a woman who could spot a structural flaw in a blueprint from 100 paces, saw them all. But she did what any savvy investor would do. She waited. She observed. She gathered data. She had sacrificed her own career, her own name to build the House of Vance. She wasn't about to let a tremor demolish the entire structure. She would reinforce it, fix it as she always had. One Monday evening, a week before the collapse, they hosted a dinner for a visiting senator. Eleanor was resplendent in a navy blue Dior gown that matched her sapphire earrings, a 15th anniversary gift from Julian. She moved through the throng of guests. A word here, a dazzling smile there, ensuring every glass was full, every conversation sparkling. Julian was holding court by the fireplace, his voice a low, confident rumble. He was telling a story about a hostile takeover, and the men around him, titans of industry, were laughing. He caught Eleanor's eye across the room and raised his glass to her. It was a public performance of affection, a gesture that earned appreciative smiles from those who saw it. But Eleanor saw the truth in his eyes. The light was gone. He was looking at a partner, an asset, not the woman he loved. The chill of that look was more profound than the evening air. Later that night, as she was removing the heavy sapphire earrings at her vanity, Julian came into the bedroom. He was still buzzing from the success of the evening. "You were brilliant tonight, Elle," he said, loosening his tie. "It was a good evening." The senator seemed impressed. Her voice was calm, measured. He was. "We closed the deal for the downtown waterfront project. He's going to fast-track the permits." He sat on the edge of their enormous bed, unbuttoning his shirt. "This is going to be our biggest project yet. Billions." Eleanor watched his reflection in the mirror. "Our project?" she asked softly. Julian paused. "Of course, our project. You're the face of the brand, darling. None of this works without you. It was the wrong answer. It used to be our project because she would have been at the drafting table with him debating load-bearing walls and aesthetic continuity. Now she was the face, a hood ornament on a car she had helped build. She placed the sapphires in their velvet box and snapped it shut. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. "I'm tired, Julian," she said, turning not to him but to the vast empty bed. It was a long day. He didn't try to touch her. The chasm between them had grown too wide for a simple gesture to cross. He simply nodded, retreated to his side of the bed, and within minutes he was asleep, leaving Eleanor alone with the silent, screaming knowledge that she was no longer a partner, but a high-level employee in the corporation of her own marriage. She lay awake for hours. The cool weight of her realization, a shroud. The foundation wasn't granite. It was sand. And the tide was coming in. Tuesday came a day painted in the blandest of colors. It was meant to be ordinary. A Pilates session at 9, a call with the caterer for the upcoming museum gala at 11, a final review of the guest list. The sky was a hazy, indifferent white. The air was still. It was the kind of day when nothing of consequence should happen. At 3:15 p.m., Eleanor was in the main living area, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the infinity pool and the sprawling grey-brown carpet of Los Angeles below. She was arranging a bouquet of white Casablanca lilies in a tall, minimalist Swedish crystal vase. The task was grounding each stem placed with architectural precision. The sharp, sweet scent of the lilies filled the air, a fragrance of peace and purity. She heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway earlier than she expected. Julian's Bentley wasn't due for another 3 hours. Her first thought was that something was wrong, an emergency, a change of plans. She placed the last lily in the vase and turned her brow furrowed with mild concern. The heavy oak door swung open. Julian stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. He looked. She couldn't quite place the expression. Not stressed, not angry. Resigned. And behind that resignation, a sliver of something that looked unnervingly like relief. "Julian, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. He stepped inside, but he didn't move toward her. Instead, he held the door open, his eyes fixed on hers. "Eleanor," he said, his tone flat, devoid of its usual charm. "We need to talk." And then a second figure emerged from behind him, stepping hesitantly into the cool, marble-floored foyer. It was a girl, no, a young woman, perhaps 24, 25 at most. She was dressed in a simple floral print sundress that did little to conceal the pronounced, unmistakable swell of her abdomen. She was at least 6 months pregnant. She had wide, frightened blue eyes and mousy brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest like a shield, her knuckles white. She looked utterly, tragically out of place, a dandelion sprouting through the marble. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The scent of the lilies suddenly seemed cloying funereal. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. She looked from the girl's terrified face to her husband's impassive one. The hairline cracks in her perfect world didn't just splinter. They exploded into a web of fissures that raced across every surface of her life. Julian, Eleanor said again, and this time her own voice was a stranger's, a thin, brittle thing. "Who is this?" Julian. Finally closed the door, the heavy thud sealing the three of them inside the beautiful, silent room. He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before delivering a fatal blow. "Eleanor, this is Amelia Rose," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the girl. "There's no easy way to say this. Amelia has been living in one of the corporate apartments downtown. Things have become complicated. She's going to be staying with us now." The words didn't compute. They were puzzle pieces from different boxes, nonsensical when put together. "Staying with us." Eleanor's gaze dropped to Amelia's rounded belly, then back to Julian's face. The question hung between them unspoken, immense. As if hearing it, Julian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice low. "The baby is mine." Amelia flinched at the bald statement, her eyes welling with tears. She looked at Eleanor with an expression of pure, pleading terror, as if expecting to be struck. But Eleanor didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange and terrifying calm washed over her, an arctic stillness that froze the very marrow in her bones. She felt as though she were watching a film of someone else's life. The perfectly arranged lilies. The silent, weeping mistress. The husband who had just detonated their shared history with a few simple words. "She's going to be living with us?" Eleanor repeated, her voice a dead monotone. She tested the words on her tongue. They tasted like poison. "Here, in this house? It's the most logical solution," Julian said, his tone shifting into the one he used in the boardroom, reasonable, decisive, as if discussing a minor logistical issue. "She needs support, medical care. It's my responsibility. We have more than enough space. We can be adults about this, Elle. We have to be. Adults." The word was an obscenity. He had brought his pregnant mistress, a girl, young enough to be his daughter, into the home his wife had built, and he was asking her to be an adult about it. He was asking the queen to welcome the usurper into the heart of the palace and offer her a guest room. Eleanor's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, finally left Julian's. They settled on Amelia. She took in the cheap dress, the scuffed sandals, the terrified, tear-streaked face. There was no hatred there. Not yet. Only a profound, bottomless sense of betrayal. This girl wasn't the cause. She was a symptom of Julian's weakness, his deceit, his utter, contemptuous disregard for the woman who had given him everything. "Which room were you planning to give her?" "Julian." Eleanor asked the question so quiet, it was almost a whisper. "The Monet suite." It has a lovely view of the rose garden, or perhaps the East Wing chamber. It's more private. Julian, mistaking her calm for acquiescence, for shock-induced compliance, actually seemed to relax. I thought the blue suite for now. It's comfortable and out of the way. The blue suite. Eleanor nodded slowly. Of course. She looked around the room at the art she had chosen, the furniture she had arranged, the life she had curated. Every object was a lie. Every memory was tainted. The entire house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. And in that moment, the Arctic calm within her began to heat. A pressure started to build behind her eyes, a volcanic force that demanded release. She had been the architect, the curator, the CEO. And when a project is corrupted beyond repair, when a collection is built on fraud, there is only one thing a person of integrity can do: demolish it. The first sound was small. Eleanor turned her back on Julian and Amelia, facing the console table where the vase of Casablanca lilies stood. For a moment, all she did was stare at her own reflection in the polished mahogany, a pale, grim mask. Then, with a flick of her wrist, so casual it could have been an accident, she knocked a single small sterling silver picture frame from the edge of the table. It fell to the marble floor with a soft clatter. The glass didn't even break. It was a photo of her and Julian in Aspen years ago, their faces flushed with cold and happiness. Julian let out an impatient sigh. "Eleanor, don't be childish." That was the word that did it. Childish. Eleanor slowly bent down, not to pick up the frame, but to grasp the heavy crystal vase full of lilies and water. It must have weighed 20 pounds. She straightened up, holding it with both hands. She looked at the beautiful, perfect flowers, then at Julian. A single tear, hot and furious, finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "You want to see childish Julian," she whispered. And then she screamed. It was not a scream of fear or of pain, but of pure, undiluted rage. A primal sound that ripped through the cathedral-like silence of the mansion. As the scream tore from her throat, she hurled the vase. It flew across the room in a glittering arc of water glass and white petals and smashed against the center of the massive plate glass window overlooking the pool. The impact was shockingly loud, a sonic boom of shattering crystal and groaning plate glass. The Swedish vase, worth more than the car Amelia probably drove, vaporized into 1,000 shards. A large spiderweb crack appeared on the window, radiating from the point of impact. Water and bruised lilies slid down the fractured glass like blood and entrails. Amelia shrieked, stumbling backward against the wall. Julian stood frozen for a second, his face a mask of disbelief. "Eleanor, have you lost your mind?" But Eleanor hadn't lost her mind. She had found it. The dam had broken. 15 years of quiet compromises, of swallowed slights, of smiling through gritted teeth, erupted in a tidal wave of destructive energy. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the gracious hostess. She was a fury, an avenging angel of her own downfall. Her eyes, wild and blazing, scanned the room. Her gaze landed on the mantelpiece above the limestone fireplace. It was lined with awards Julian had won, gleaming brass and crystal trophies plaques, celebrating him as Developer of the Year, Man of Vision. They were props in the theater of his success. She strode to the fireplace, seized a heavy bronze Global Leadership Award, and used it as a battering ram. The first crystal obelisk she struck exploded like a firework. Smash. The second, a glass plaque shattered against the stone. Crash. One by one, she annihilated every symbol of his public glory, the sounds of destruction echoing her own internal demolition. "Stop it, Eleanor! Stop this right now!" Julian bellowed, finally moving toward her. She whirled on him, brandishing the bronze award like a weapon. Her face was contorted, beautiful and terrifying. "Don't you touch me!" she snarled, and the venom in her voice made him recoil. "You don't get to touch me. Not anymore." She turned her back on him and swept her arm across a side table, sending a collection of antique Fabergé eggs, each a priceless anniversary gift, crashing to the floor. They burst in splashes of enamel and gold, their delicate, jeweled carcasses skittering across the marble. She was a tornado tearing through her own life. She moved from the living room to the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set for a dinner party that would never happen. She grabbed the edge of the silk tablecloth and pulled. An avalanche of Waterford crystal Royal Doulton china and Georgian silverware cascaded to the floor in a deafening, catastrophic symphony of ruin. Glasses that had toasted senators' plates that had served princes all of it became glittering rubble at her feet. Julian and Amelia could only watch in horror. He was shouting her name, a meaningless mantra against the storm. Amelia was huddled in the foyer, sobbing. Eleanor was beyond hearing them. She was on a mission. She stormed into Julian's study, his sanctuary, his command center. The room smelled of leather and hubris. On his vast desk sat a model of the new downtown waterfront project he was so proud of. She picked it up and with a guttural cry threw it against the wall where it splintered into 1,000 pieces of miniature failed ambition. She tore books from his shelves, not just any books, but the leather-bound first editions he collected as a display of intellect. She raked his desk clear, sending his laptop, his papers, his expensive fountain pens flying. She took a letter opener and systematically shredded the KPM leather of his high-backed executive chair, slicing through the hide with vicious, methodical strokes. Finally, she made her way to the grand, sweeping staircase. Her destination was the master suite, their bedroom, the most intimate and therefore the most violated space in the house. She burst into the room. The California king bed was perfectly made, a sea of white fret linens. On her vanity sat her perfumes, her creams, her life as a wife. On his side, his watch collection, his valet stand. She went to his closet first. It was a walk-in room, larger than most New York apartments. Racks of bespoke suits from Savile Row shoes, from John Lobb shirts ironed to perfection by the housekeeper. She didn't just throw them on the floor. She grabbed a bottle of vintage Chateau Margaux from the mini-fridge in their suite one he'd been saving, and began to douse everything. The deep red wine bled into the fine wool and silk, a mortal stain. She poured it over his suits, his shirts, his handmade Italian shoes, drowning his vanity in a torrent of expensive vinegar. Then she turned to her own closet, her own armory of beautiful cages. The Dior gowns, the Chanel suits, the Jimmy Choo shoes. They were the costumes for a role she would no longer play. She didn't douse them in wine. She began to tear at them with her bare hands, the rip of silk and satin a counterpoint to the earlier sounds of shattering glass. The tools of her trade, the symbols of her complicity were destroyed by their master. Panting, her knuckles bleeding, her designer dress torn, she stood in the center of the ruined bedroom. Julian appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock and fury. "Are you satisfied?" he spat, his voice trembling with rage. Are you done with your little tantrum?" Eleanor's chest was heaving. She looked at the carnage surrounding her. The destruction wasn't chaotic. It was precise. Everything she had destroyed was a symbol of their shared lie. The art, the awards, the fine dining, the clothes, all of it was gone. She walked past him out of the bedroom, her bare feet crunching on unseen debris. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at the sobbing girl still huddled in the foyer. She walked back to the center of the living room, to the spot where it all began. She stood there, a queen in the heart of her raised kingdom. She felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. The pressure was gone. In its place was a cold, clear void. She turned to face her husband. Her voice when she spoke was no longer shrill with rage, but low and steady, forged in the fires of her own making. "I'm not done," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "I've just started." The silence that descended upon the mansion was heavier and more oppressive than the noise that had preceded it. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting stops, thick with the smell of destruction. Spilled wine, expensive perfume, and the dust of pulverized plaster and glass. Julian stared at Eleanor, his fury momentarily eclipsed by a chilling realization. This was not the hysterical woman he had expected. The fire in her eyes had been banked, replaced by cold, hard embers. The woman standing before him regal amidst the wreckage she had wrought was a stranger. He had expected tears pleading a messy emotional collapse that he could manage, control, and ultimately use against her. He had not expected a demolition. "You're insane." He breathed the words, both an accusation and a diagnosis. "You're certifiably insane." Amelia, emboldened by the silence, crept forward from the foyer. Her tear-streaked face was a mixture of fear and something else, a dawning awareness. She looked from the devastation around her to the cold fury on Eleanor's face, and then to Julian. The powerful, charming man who had promised to take care of her was standing helpless in the face of a storm he had unleashed. "Julian, maybe I should go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can call a taxi." "You're not going anywhere," Julian snapped his authority, returning as he focused on the simpler problem of the frightened girl. He turned his glare back to Eleanor. "Look at what you've done. Look at this. You've terrified her." Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "Oh, I've terrified her. You drag this child into our home as a human shield for your own cowardice, and I'm the monster. You have a spectacular sense of perspective, Julian." She took a deliberate step forward, her bare foot crunching on the glittering dust of a shattered Lalique bowl. She didn't even flinch. "You wanted to be adults about this. Fine. Let's be adults. This is no longer your home. As of this moment, you are trespassing." Julian's face purpled with indignation. "Trespassing? This is my house. My name is on every deed, every title. A name I helped build." Eleanor countered, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "An empire I helped strategize, a life I designed. You may have paid for the bricks, but I provided the blueprint and the mortar, and I'm reclaiming my intellectual property." Before Julian could form a retort, Eleanor calmly walked to the one piece of furniture she hadn't touched, a small antique secretary desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer, pulled out her cell phone, and dialed a number from memory. Julian watched her, a sneer forming on his lips. "Who are you calling the police? Go ahead. They'll take one look at this and put you in a 72-hour psychiatric hold. It would probably be for the best." Eleanor ignored him, pressing the phone to her ear. It rang once. "Isabella," she said, her voice a paradigm of control. "It's Eleanor Vance. Yes, it's been too long. I'm afraid I'm not calling to catch up. Something has happened. No, I'm fine. I'm actually clearer than I've been in years. I need you. I need your professional services." A flicker of unease crossed Julian's face. Isabella. He vaguely remembered the name. Eleanor's maid of honor. Some fiery Italian girl who had gone to law school. "How soon can you get to my house in Bel Air?" Eleanor continued, her eyes locked on Julian's. "Yes, the main residence. There's been a domestic disturbance and a trespassing issue I need dealt with immediately." "Excellent. The gate code is the same. I'll see you shortly." She ended the call and placed the phone on the desk. "Isabella," Julian asked, forcing a condescending laugh. "You're calling your old college roommate? What's she going to do? Elle sue me for being a bad husband." "Isabella." "Rossi." Eleanor clarified her tone. "Glacial is not my old college roommate. She's the senior managing partner at Rossi, Klein & Associates. Her specialty is high-asset contentious divorce and corporate litigation. And right now, Julian, you are the definition of a high-value asset in a very, very contentious situation." The blood drained from Julian's face. Isabella Rossi. He knew that name. Not from Eleanor, but from the financial pages. She was a shark, a legend in the Los Angeles legal community, known for eviscerating arrogant husbands and dismantling corporate facades. She was the lawyer men like him had nightmares about. The sneer vanished, replaced by the cold dread of a man who has catastrophically miscalculated. He had thought he was playing chess against a pawn. He now realized he had just checkmated himself against a queen who had a grand master on speed dial. He looked at the destruction again. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was a declaration of war. Every shattered object was a message. He had tried to devalue her, to reduce her to a live-in housekeeper who would accommodate his new life. In response, she had systematically destroyed every item that represented the value he understood, money. She had just wiped millions of dollars of material assets off their balance sheet as a prelude to coming after the rest. "You have 5 minutes to get her," Eleanor said, nodding toward Amelia, "and your essential belongings out of my house. When my lawyer arrives, I want you both gone. You can't throw me out of my own home." He roared a last gasp of blustering authority. "Watch me," Eleanor replied, her voice soft as steel. The doorbell chimed impossibly fast. It was a crisp, clear sound that cut through the tension. Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest, most terrifying smile Julian had ever seen. "It seems she said your 5 minutes are up." It wasn't Isabella Rossi. It was 2 uniformed officers from the LAPD. Julian's earlier threat had materialized, but not in the way he intended. One of the neighbors, hearing the crescendo of destruction, had called it in. Julian's face lit with triumphant relief. Finally, he said, turning to the officers, "Thank God you're here, officers. My wife? She's had some sort of psychotic break, as you can see." The 2 officers, a seasoned veteran and a younger woman, stepped inside. Their eyes widening at the scale of the carnage. It looked like a hurricane had made landfall in the living room. But then they looked at the 3 people. They saw Julian agitated and angry. They saw Amelia pregnant, weeping, and terrified. And they saw Eleanor standing poised and eerily calm in the middle of it all. She had a bleeding knuckle and a torn dress, but her expression was one of complete control. She did not look psychotic. She looked like the victim of a profound assault. "Ma'am," the senior officer said, his voice gentle as he addressed Eleanor. "Can you tell us what happened here?" Before Eleanor could speak, Julian interjected. "I came home, and she just went crazy, started smashing everything. I have a guest here. She's pregnant, and my wife attacked us." Eleanor held up a hand, a gesture of such authority that Julian actually fell silent. She looked the officer in the eye. "Officer," she said, her voice steady and clear. "My husband, Julian Vance, brought his pregnant mistress into our marital home this afternoon and informed me she would be moving in. He created a situation of extreme emotional distress. The damage you see is the result of that distress. However, I have not laid a hand on him nor on his guest. I have, however, asked them both to leave my property. They have refused. My lawyer is on her way to handle the civil matter, but as of right now, they are trespassers." The officer looked from Eleanor's calm demeanor to Julian's sputtering rage. He had seen this drama play out 100 times in the mansions of the rich. He knew a calculated power play when he saw one. So the officer said to Julian, "Given the situation, and to de-escalate things, it might be best if you and the young lady found somewhere else to stay for the night." Best for who Julian demanded. "This is my house." "It's also her house, sir," the officer replied, his patience thinning. "Right now, it's a civil dispute. But if you don't leave and she wants to press charges for trespassing, we'll be back, and it'll be a different conversation. I suggest you go." Julian was trapped. The law, which he so often used as a tool, was now being used against him. Defeated, he glared at Eleanor, a look of pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "It isn't," Eleanor agreed. "Now get out." He grabbed Amelia by the arm, his grip far from gentle, and pulled her toward the door. Defeated and humiliated, Julian Vance and his pregnant mistress retreated from the palace he had tried to claim, leaving Queen Eleanor standing alone, the victor on the first day of a very long war. As the door closed behind them, Eleanor finally allowed herself a single shuddering breath. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it was physical. She looked at the ruin around her. It was a mess. It was a disaster. It was a perfectly clean slate. The arrival of Isabella Rossi a full 25 minutes after the police had escorted a seething Julian and a traumatized Amelia from the property was an island of order in an ocean of chaos. She didn't arrive in a flashy sports car, but in a discreet dark grey Audi sedan that purred to a stop in the gravel driveway. She emerged not with the frantic energy of a first responder, but with the measured grace of a monarch visiting a ravaged province. Dressed in a severely tailored charcoal grey suit, her dark hair pulled into a severe chignon. She was the physical embodiment of control. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, which had missed nothing since they were teenagers scheming in a dorm room, swept across the vista of destruction in the grand foyer. She took in the cratered window, the glittering dust of pulverized antiques, the Jackson Pollock-esque splash of red wine against a silk wallpapered wall. Her expression remained impassive, but a trained observer would have seen her mind at work, not gasping at the loss, but calculating the leverage. Eleanor was huddled on the bottom step of the grand staircase, a cashmere throw she'd retrieved from an untouched guest room wrapped around her shoulders. She looked small and fragile, a stark contrast to the elemental force she had been an hour earlier. The adrenaline had leached away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the first trembling whispers of doubt. Isabella's low-heeled Salvatore Ferragamo pumps made sharp, decisive clicks on the marble floor, a sound that cut through the funereal silence. She navigated a treacherous path around the carcass of a Louis XV console table without breaking stride. She stopped before Eleanor, her gaze finally softening as she took in her friend's pale face and the dried track of a single tear on her cheek. "Well," Isabella said, her voice a dry, calm tonic. She nudged a shard of cobalt-blue porcelain with the toe of her shoe. "I always thought Aunt Sophia's taste in mice and shepherdesses was a bit garish." Eleanor looked up, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was a wedding gift. From her. "Then she'll understand," Isabella retorted smoothly. "She always said your house was more of a museum than a home. It seems you've finally curated a new exhibition, Consequences." She extended a hand. "Come on, let's not sit in the blast crater. We need a clean room and a clear head." "Is the library intact?" Eleanor nodded, allowing her friend to help her to her feet. The library, tucked away in the east wing, had been spared her rampage. It was a sanctuary of dark wood, worn leather, and the comforting smell of old paper. Isabella guided her to a deep Chesterfield sofa, and then walked to the wet bar, her movements economical and precise. She bypassed the collection of high-end single malts and poured 2 glasses of still water, handing one to Eleanor. "Drink," she commanded gently. "Now, I am your friend, and I love you, and we will have a proper emotional breakdown with ice cream and terrible movies later. But right now I am your legal counsel, and your counsel needs you to be a witness, not a victim. Give me the timeline. From the second you heard the car on the gravel. Every word, every gesture. Don't interpret. Don't edit. Just report." She sat opposite Eleanor in a stiff-backed leather chair, retrieved a slim leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen from her briefcase, and waited. The simple professional act was profoundly steadying. Eleanor took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the facts of the afternoon's ambush. She recounted Julian's flat tone, Amelia's terrified silence, the obscene reasonableness of his proposal that they all be adults under one roof. She described the arctic calm that preceded the storm of her rage and the methodical nature of the destruction that followed. She finished with the arrival of the police and Julian's humiliating retreat. Isabella listened, her pen scratching occasionally against the paper. She didn't flinch. She didn't offer sympathetic platitudes. She was a seismologist, analyzing the readings of an earthquake. When Eleanor fell silent, Isabella capped her pen. "His fatal error," she said, her voice resonating with clinical certainty, "was not the affair. It was not even the pregnancy. Men like Julian consider those to be manageable liabilities. His fatal error was underestimating his opponent. He expected a weeping, hysterical woman he could sedate and manage. He was prepared for a tragedy. He was not prepared for an insurgency." I snapped. "Izzy." Eleanor whispered, the doubt creeping back. "I lost my mind." "No," Isabella corrected, leaning forward with fierce intensity. "Listen to me, Elle. You did not lose your mind. You focused it. He came in here to obliterate your reality, to demote you from wife to warden in your own home. Hysteria would have been a surrender. Tears would have been a concession. What you did?" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the ruined main hall, was a tactical response. You did not harm a person. You did not utter a single threat of physical violence. You destroyed property. In the community property state of California, that property is as much yours as it is his. Legally, this is an act of dissipation of marital assets, provoked, I will argue, successfully by an act of extreme emotional cruelty. He walked into this house with a psychological cudgel, and you responded by burning the village. It's dramatic, yes. But it is not insane. It is a statement of intent written in shattered crystal. She let the words sink in, watching the hunted look in Eleanor's eyes begin to recede, replaced by a flicker of the cold fire from before. He thought he could get you committed. Isabella continued, her voice hardening. That was his play. Paint you as unhinged, get an emergency psychiatric hold, and while you're recovering, his lawyers file for divorce, seize control of all assets, and install his pregnant little project in your home. You, by having the clarity to call me and to speak calmly to the police, dismantled that strategy before it could even begin. You won the first battle, Elle, decisively. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. The cashmere throw felt less like a comfort and more like a cape. He told the police it was his house, that his name is on everything. I'm sure it is, Isabella said with a dismissive wave. Titles, deeds. That's the wallpaper of wealth. I'm interested in the load-bearing walls. Which brings us to the inevitable question, the prenup. Here, Eleanor's entire demeanor shifted. The transformation was subtle, but total. The weary victim vanished, and the architect re-emerged. A slow, calculating smile touched her lips. That's the beautiful part, Izzy. There isn't one. Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrow shot up. A man with $1 billion portfolio and no prenuptial agreement. Julian Vance, you disappoint me. That's not just arrogant, it's sloppy. Oh. He tried. Eleanor clarified, a glint of old mischief in her eyes. About 10 years ago, when he officially incorporated Vance Global, his lawyers practically chained him to a desk until he presented me with a post-nuptial agreement. It was a work of art, really. A masterpiece of condescension disguised in legalese. It offered me a generous stipend in case of divorce, the house, and a lovely parting gift as if I were a retiring executive assistant. And you told him where to file it. I presume I told him it was an insult to the 15 years of my life. I'd already invested, Eleanor said. I told him I was a partner, not a line item on his balance sheet. But I also knew a direct refusal would lead to a war I wasn't ready to fight. So I employed a different tactic. I made a counteroffer. She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. I told him I would sign a post-nup, but only one that I drafted. I spent 2 months with a boutique contract lawyer, someone he didn't know, and we created a document that on the surface looked like a sentimental acknowledgement of my role. It was filled with clauses about my immeasurable contributions to the social and aesthetic value of the Vance brand, my strategic hosting of philanthropic and political events, my sacrifice of a promising architectural career for the betterment of the family enterprise. Julian's lawyers glanced at it and laughed. They told him it was fluff, unenforceable emotional nonsense. So to pacify his artistic wife, he signed it. Isabella was now leaning forward, her earlier professional interest turning into rapacious glee. Eleanor, please don't. Tell me. The clauses they dismissed as fluff, Eleanor continued, her smile widening, were tied to tangible financial metrics. My social contributions were linked to a percentage of the value of any deal closed with a contact I had personally cultivated. My brand management was valued as a percentage of the company's annual marketing budget. My sacrificed career was assigned a phantom equity value in Vance Global vesting over time. It's a shadow partnership agreement, Izzy. He signed a document that essentially makes me the single largest non-institutional shareholder in his company. Isabella fell back into her chair, letting out a low whistle. She looked at her friend with newfound profound respect. "You magnificent Machiavellian woman. Where is this document?" "In a safe deposit box at a private vault in Pasadena registered under my maiden name," Eleanor said, "along with copies of my original blueprints and signed development plans for the first 3 commercial properties that gave him his start, the ones Vanity Fair called the work of a burgeoning genius. His genius. I have the proof that I was the architect of his foundation in more ways than one." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of this revelation settled. This wasn't just about getting a fair share. This was about proving ownership. Then Eleanor's expression clouded over. She stood and walked to the window, looking out into the immaculate, dark garden. "But that's not the knife, Izzy. That's just the appetizer. There's something else. Something that changes this from a divorce into something much darker." Isabella watched her, her legal instincts tingling. "Go on." "Julian has been different for the last year." Reckless Eleanor said, her back still to the room. "It started with the Sterling Developments acquisition. It was a massive hostile takeover. All his advisors, including me, told him it was too risky. The company was drowning in debt. But Julian has to be the biggest shark in the tank. He went ahead anyway, leveraging Vance Global to the absolute hilt." "I remember the deal," Isabella nodded. "The financial press called it his crowning achievement." "They called it what he told them to call it," Eleanor said bitterly. "But I knew the numbers didn't add up. The debt load was too high. The cash flow couldn't service it. I kept wondering how he'd done it, how he'd satisfied the banks. So, I looked." She finally turned around. Her face pale, her eyes dark with the gravity of what she was about to say. "I still have an executive-level access key to the company's main servers, an old back door from when I used to review projects for him. He never thought to revoke it. He never thought I'd use it. For the past 3 months, late at night, I've been following a trail of digital breadcrumbs." She took a shaky breath. "Izzy, it's all a house of cards. He faked the entire financial basis for the Sterling deal. He created a network of at least a dozen offshore shell corporations through a firm in the Cayman Islands. Ethelred Holdings, Bayside Ventures, names that mean nothing because they are nothing. He began systematically transferring Vance Global's real tangible assets into these shells, then presented falsified earnings reports and asset statements to the banks and shareholders. He made the company look twice as valuable as it was to secure the loans for a deal that is now sinking the entire ship. He didn't just lie to me. He committed massive systemic securities fraud, wire fraud, and bank fraud." The glee was gone from Isabella's face, replaced by the deadly seriousness of a bomb disposal expert who has just found the timer. This revelation transcended divorce law and entered the realm of the federal penitentiary. "He thinks the affair is his biggest problem," Eleanor concluded, her voice a near whisper. "He has no idea that the entire world he built is a lie, and that I'm the only other person on earth who has the receipts." Isabella stood up slowly, walking over to the bar, and this time pouring 2 very stiff measures of the Macallan 25. She handed one to Eleanor. "Drink this," she said, her voice low and steady. "All of it. Because you are at a crossroads, Elle. What you have is not leverage for a divorce settlement. It is a nuclear bomb. If we use this information, it's not about getting the house or half the assets anymore. It's about whether Julian Vance spends the next 20 years in a federal prison. It means the complete and utter destruction of his life, his name, and his legacy. There is no coming back from it. She locked eyes with her friend, the question hanging unspoken in the air. How far are you willing to go? Eleanor looked down at the amber liquid in her glass. She thought of Julian's flat, dismissive eyes. She thought of the terrified, pregnant girl he had used as a human prop. She thought of the 15 years of her life, her ambition, her love that he had just tried to sweep into the trash like so much meaningless debris. She raised the glass, her hand no longer shaking, and drank the entire contents in one long, fiery swallow. She set the empty glass down on the table with a sharp, definitive click. "He wanted to burn my world down, Izzy," she said, her voice like ice. "He just didn't realize I'm the one holding the matches." Isabella's shark-like smile returned cold and brilliant. "Good. Then here is the plan. We fight a two-front war. Front one is public, noisy, messy, and conventional. Tomorrow morning I file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. The story of the pregnant mistress in the marital home will find its way to every gossip columnist in this town. We will bury him in a PR nightmare. He will be fighting for his reputation, thinking this is a battle of public opinion." She paused, taking a sip of her own scotch. "But front two is sealant, and it is lethal. My team of forensic accountants, absolute killers all of them, will begin a deep dive into the data you've uncovered. We will build an airtight, ironclad case of his financial crimes. We will package it, document it, and hold it. And when he is at his weakest, bogged down in the mud of the divorce, we will confront him, not with a lawsuit, but with an ultimatum. He either signs over a controlling interest in the company and everything else we want, or a package gets couriered to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC. We will give him a choice, poverty or prison." She closed her briefcase with a final, satisfying snap. "He didn't just bring a wrecking ball to your door today, Eleanor. He handed you the demolition codes to his entire universe. In the end, this was never about a shattered vase or a ruined suit. It was about a shattered life and a ruined promise." Eleanor Vance's story is a stark reminder that the quietest people often have the most formidable strength, and underestimating them can be a fatal mistake. She wasn't just fighting for her share of a fortune. She was fighting for her identity, for the years she had invested, and for the right to not be erased. Her journey from the perfect wife to a powerhouse who held her husband's entire future in her hands is a testament to the fact that when you push someone to the brink, they might just discover the power to push back 10 times harder. What do you think? Was Eleanor's explosive reaction justified, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Poor wife walks in on Millionaire proposing to Mistress. What she does next will shock you. When Maria Delgado pushed open the ornate doors to the private dining room, she was expecting a quiet evening with her millionaire husband, Jacob. Instead, she found him kneeling before another woman, an extravagant ring poised between his trembling fingers. In that split second, her world shattered like delicate porcelain dropped from a great height. Emotions warred inside her: shock, betrayal, fury. But what Maria did next defied every expectation. The consequences of that decisive moment would reverberate through high society circles, revealing secret alliances, shattered trust, and a woman's quest to carve her own destiny out of the chaos her husband had unleashed. Maria Delgado had been raised to believe in the power of love, Born in a modest suburb of Philadelphia, she'd spent her childhood studying hard, watching her parents work long hours, and learning the value of perseverance. Love, in her eyes, was meant to be honorable, a sacred promise that transcended time and adversity. So, when she married Jacob Delgado, an unassuming man at the time, who later skyrocketed to wealth, she believed their union was fated. Everything about Jacob back then spoke of ambition tempered by warmth, a thirst for success supported by a deep devotion to her. They married in their mid-20s, beginning with a modest apartment in downtown Philadelphia. While he climbed the rungs of the real estate development world, Maria supported them both by teaching music lessons to neighborhood kids. She beamed with pride each time Jacob closed a deal that brought them a step closer to his dream, building an empire. Through the nascent years of their marriage, every victory was shared. Every setback was consoled by the other. The couple felt invincible. As Jacob's fortunes grew, so did his interests, and the city seemed too small for his evolving ambitions. With the promise of even greater success, he uprooted them to New York. Over time, he transformed from the modest man Maria once knew into someone revered by the upper echelons of Manhattan's elite. He became known for orchestrating multi-million-dollar real estate ventures. Their modest apartment turned into a lavish penthouse overlooking Central Park. From dressing in simple button-down shirts to adorning himself in bespoke suits from Savile Row, Jacob thrived in the glitz and glamour of high society life. Maria was proud of him, of course. But with each acquisition, each expansion, each lavish party thrown by Manhattan's wealthy set, she began to sense something intangible slipping away. The sweet, humble spark in Jacob's eyes was being replaced by a relentless desire for more. Their shared dinners became fewer and fewer. Their conversations, once intimately about dreams and daily life, revolved around boardroom strategies and the constant hum of new deals. Where there was once closeness, an unspoken chasm was opening. Still, Maria was no stranger to sacrifice. She believed that a marriage demanded effort and understanding. She accepted that his time was consumed by meetings, power lunches with foreign investors, and charity galas where he networked. She made space for his blossoming empire and refused to let suspicion take root. If he was distant, she told herself, it was because he was tired. If his phone rang at odd hours, it was because that was how the real estate world worked. She clung to the memory of that earnest young man who held her hand in their first tiny kitchen, dreaming of a brighter future together. But all illusions can shatter. Late one evening, after one of his countless events, Jacob casually mentioned that he wanted to take her to an exclusive restaurant the next night. Belafonte's, perched high above the city with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sparkling skyline. Maria's heart fluttered. A private dinner just for them, exactly what they needed to revive their bond. She felt a spark of hope that maybe their relationship could rekindle, that the old Jacob would re-emerge, if only for a night. The following day, she dressed with care in a flowing, emerald green gown. She recalled how green was Jacob's favorite color on her, how he'd often say her eyes looked like precious jewels when she wore it. She left their penthouse with trembling excitement, not wanting to arrive too early, but also conscious that the invitation had felt momentous, like something significant was in store. When she reached the restaurant, an attentive maitre d' greeted her by name and led her down a corridor to a discreet, gold-trimmed door. Soft piano music flowed from within. Her heart pounded, imagining a candlelit room just for the two of them. Instead, as the door swung open, she stumbled upon a scene she could never have prepared for. Jacob, down on one knee, proposing to a statuesque blonde woman, his mistress, whose face Maria recognized from hushed rumors at parties and unconfirmed gossip in tabloids. The ring in Jacob's hand sparkled like a fallen star, captured by the overhead chandelier's light. Time froze, capturing her shock, the mistress's gasp, and Jacob's horrified expression in an excruciating tableau. Maria felt dizzy, her sense of reality splintering. Memories of their simple days in Philadelphia flooded her mind. Her hands shook as she clutched the handle of the door for support. She sensed the mater de quickly slip away, likely to avoid the pending explosion. The look on Jacob's face rapidly morphed from romantic fervor to utter panic. How long has this been going on? Maria finally managed to choke out, voice trembling. The blonde woman, Annalise Winslow, as Maria would later learn, stepped back, her hand protectively covering the ring that Jacob had tried to slip on her finger. She had a deer-in-headlights look, as if she had expected this moment, but not in such a brutal collision of truths. "Maria," Jacob began, rising slowly from his knee, "it's not what it looks like." A pit of molten anger rose in Maria's chest. The anguish burned, pried open by betrayal. She glanced at the ring Jacob was holding. It wasn't a tiny diamond. It was a massive rock, overshadowing the modest ring she herself had worn with pride for years. Everything about this was a sickening confirmation of what she had refused to suspect. She refused to let him see her crumble, her eyes brimming with unshed tears locked onto Jacob's. "For once in your life," she said, voice trembling yet steel-edged, "tell me the truth." Jacob glanced between Maria and Annalise. Shame flickered across his expression, but only for a moment before resolve set in. In a voice that cracked, he said, "I was going to explain it after this. I never wanted you to find out this way." He was trying to speak gently, but Maria found it galling. Here, in a lavish, private dining room that cost more per meal than some people earned in a month, her husband was kneeling before another woman with an engagement ring. Her world felt false, illusions shattered like shards of broken glass. But instead of running, instead of screaming or hurling every insult she could muster, Maria inhaled. She decided then and there that she wouldn't collapse. Not now, not ever. With a composure that surprised even herself, she said, "Fine." She tugged off her wedding band, the simple gold band that had once symbolized their hopeful union. She placed it gently on the nearest table, right next to a silver platter meant for some extravagant dinner. She looked at Annalise, whose cheeks had gone pale. "Congratulations," Maria said icily. "You've caught a big fish. I hope you both choke on it." She turned on her heel, ignoring Jacob's pleas for her to wait. She walked out with her head held high, tears threatening to fall, but refusing to let them out until she was out of that stifling, perfumed environment. Little did either of them know, Maria's next actions would set off a chain reaction of hidden truths, corporate betrayals, and unexpected alliances that would ultimately turn the power dynamics of their world on its head. Maria spent the night at a friend's townhouse near Gramercy Park. This friend, Jennifer Robertson, was one of the few people Maria trusted implicitly. Jennifer, a lawyer by profession, had seen far too many wealthy husbands try to con their wives out of rightful settlements. In the warmly lit living room, Maria recounted the horrifying scene. Jennifer listened quietly, her arms folded, eyes flashing indignation at Jacob's betrayal. When Maria finally finished, the tears she had held back since the restaurant began to slide down her cheeks. Jennifer promptly pulled her into a hug. "Maria," she murmured, "this is terrible, but you're not going through it alone. This time, you have to look out for yourself." Maria sniffled, still reeling. "I never thought. All those business trips, all those late nights." Jennifer tightened her grip. "People like Jacob, they think they can have everything. The wife, the mistress, the image of perfection. You don't deserve that." Maria wiped her tears. A cold anger took root in her heart, overshadowing her sorrow. She had sacrificed too much, believed in Jacob too long. Perhaps she'd been naive, but there was no time left for self-pity. "What do I do?" she asked, gazing at Jennifer. I'm not going to just let him throw me away. Jennifer pursed her lips, then reached for her phone. First, we need to call Patrick Hodges, one of the top divorce attorneys in New York. He'll know exactly what to do. The Delgado empire might have been built by Jacob, but you've stood beside him every step of the way. New York law won't ignore that. For hours into the night, they planned. Jennifer explained the complexities of high-asset divorces, the myriad ways spouses try to hide money. They dissected the financial empire Jacob had built, the real estate ventures, the offshore accounts rumored by some to exist, the charity foundations that he might use as tax shelters. Maria listened, took notes, and found her heartbreak morphing into a dogged determination. If Jacob thought he could so brazenly propose to another woman, he was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, Maria woke from a fitful sleep. She rose, showered, and dressed in a simple black outfit. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes rimmed with sadness, yet also lit by an undercurrent of resolve. She thought about that shocking moment in the restaurant. It had been mere hours since her life was turned inside out, yet it felt like an eternity. An unexpected wave of curiosity washed over her. What kind of woman was Annalise Winslow, beyond the honey-blonde hair and designer gown? How long had Annalise waited in the wings for Jacob to propose? Maria's mind churned with possibilities. Was she manipulated by Jacob's power, or was she the manipulator? Determined to cut through the speculation, Maria decided she wanted facts. She dialed a private investigator's number, someone recommended by Jennifer. A man named Richard Pine, known in certain circles for his thorough, discreet approach. Maria remembered meeting him briefly at a philanthropic event. He'd been introduced to her as the best man to find what's hidden. If there was dirt to be dug up, Richard Pine could unearth it. Within an hour, Maria was sitting in a small, upscale coffee shop near Union Square. Face to face with Richard, he was a sturdy man in his mid-50s, with kind but calculating eyes. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Delgado?" he asked in a measured tone, sipping his espresso. Maria inhaled slowly. "I found my husband proposing to another woman last night," she said, voice unwavering. "I need to know everything about her, her background, her motivations, any skeletons in her closet." Richard set down his cup, making the slightest grimace. "I'm sorry to hear that. Cheating spouses are unfortunately too common in my line of work. But let's talk specifics. What do you already know about this woman?" "Her name is Annalise Winslow. I believe she's from Los Angeles originally. She's in her mid-20s, definitely younger than me or Jacob. Rumor has it she used to be a model, or maybe a socialite. I'm not entirely sure." Richard nodded, scribbling notes. "Understood. I'll compile everything I can find. Miss Winslow's finances, connections, travel history, job history, whatever might help. And I assume you also want me to keep an eye on Jacob's dealings?" He lifted an eyebrow knowingly. "Yes," Maria replied firmly. "I have a strong feeling there's more to this than just an affair. I want to know if he's been hiding money or if he's planning to move assets out of the country. Anything that can help me get some measure of justice when we go to court, or even before that." Richard nodded again. "I'll be in touch soon." Maria thanked him and left, feeling that with each step she was moving deeper into a labyrinth where she had to be the one calling the shots. She wasn't merely a scorned wife. She was becoming an orchestrator of her own destiny. By afternoon, Maria knew she could no longer avoid returning to the penthouse. She needed her clothes, her documents, her life. She braced herself for the confrontation that was inevitable. Summoning what courage she had, she took a taxi to the towering building that had once felt like a dream come true. Its gleaming marble lobby now felt foreign. She ascended in the private elevator, her heart pounding, stomach in knots. As she slid the keycard and the doors to the penthouse opened, she heard Jacob's voice carrying down the corridor. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. She recognized the female voice, Annalise. They seemed to be arguing. Maria took a moment to listen. Through the grand foyer, she could make out the two silhouettes in the living area. She heard Annalise's voice, tight with anger. "You said you'd handle this differently. Now everyone's talking about it like some scandal. How do you think this makes me look?" Jacob hissed back. "You think I planned for Maria to walk in? God, Annalise, I'm juggling a million things. The board at Delgado Holdings is going to be furious if this leaks to the press. This was supposed to be discreet." Maria felt a twinge of savage satisfaction hearing the cracks form in their alliance. With her shoulders set, she stepped forward, letting her heels clack on the polished floor. Jacob and Annalise whirled around, identical expressions of shock distorting their features. "Maria," Jacob started, lifting a hand in an entreaty, but Maria's gaze was locked onto Annalise. Up close, the mistress was undeniably striking tall, poised with carefully styled waves of golden hair. Yet Maria noticed a flicker of insecurity behind that controlled exterior. "Good," she thought. "I'm not the only one rattled. I just came to get my things," Maria said plainly. "Then I'll leave, and you two can celebrate your engagement in peace." Annalise's shoulders relaxed, but her eyes narrowed in faint challenge. Jacob stepped forward. "Maria, wait. I think we should talk." She laughed mirthlessly. "Talk? That's what you wanted to do? You were going to propose to her, Jacob. Don't pretend there's any middle ground here. And honestly, what do I have to say to you? Congratulations." Jacob's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "Actually, it is," Maria snapped, her emotions flaring. "You made a choice, a public choice no less. I can't undo that, and I won't be your doormat." Annalise crossed her arms, lips pressed together, as though restraining herself from retorting. Maria caught the fleeting glance she gave Jacob, some mixture of fear and entitlement. It dawned on Maria that Annalise may have feared losing the security Jacob's fortune promised. The scorned wife's presence in the penthouse complicated matters for the mistress, who presumably dreamed of living here in style. "Just take whatever you need," Jacob said after a moment. "We don't need to fight in front of her." Maria's chest constricted, memories of 1,000 shared moments in this home swirling in her mind. But she suppressed the pain and moved calmly to the master bedroom, which was filled with expensive furnishings and the faint scent of the cologne Jacob once gifted her. She methodically packed a suitcase with her clothes and personal items. Her fingertips lingered on a framed photo of them in front of their first store-bought Christmas tree, back in their humble Philadelphia apartment. She set it aside, not wanting to carry something so laden with nostalgia. As she re-entered the living area, she caught a glimpse of Annalise's engagement ring glinting in the afternoon light. Rage flared again, but she forced composure, reminding herself that she had a plan. Once she had everything she needed, she paused at the door, turning back to them. "Jacob," she said, "I've asked Patrick Hodges to represent me. If you want to avoid a scorched earth divorce, I suggest you speak to your attorney." Annalise's eyes flared at the mention of divorce. Possibly it hammered home the reality that Maria wasn't just going to vanish quietly. Jacob's face fell. He tried to speak, but words failed him. In that charged silence, Maria left. She felt hollow, but also strangely empowered. The woman who had walked in on her husband's betrayal mere hours ago was no longer the same, and what awaited her next was a labyrinth of hidden truths. Over the next week, Manhattan buzzed with rumors. The Delgado name had become a fixture of high society galas and philanthropic events. Whispers circulated through penthouse brunches, exclusive clubs, and midnight parties. Jacob Delgado had not only cheated on Maria, but had proposed to his mistress. The gossip columns ate it up. Real estate mogul's secret engagement was the headline in at least one online publication. People debated whether Maria was blindsided or complicit, whether she'd stay or go, and what the mistress was like. In the meantime, Patrick Hodges, the formidable divorce attorney, laid out a roadmap for Maria. They met in his sleek midtown office, with Jennifer present as moral support. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the hustle and bustle of Manhattan below, as though showing a world that never slept, never paused for heartbreak. "Maria," Patrick said in a calm, almost fatherly tone, "Jacob's net worth is estimated at around $700 million. We need to act fast to ensure he doesn't move assets out of reach." $700 million, Maria echoed, stunned, though she knew the figure hovered in that range. She had watched his success balloon over the years, but to hear it stated so plainly shook her. She'd never placed a dollar value on their relationship. Patrick continued, "We'll file motions to freeze a significant portion of his assets until the court rules on equitable distribution. But be ready, his legal team will fight. Also, the prenuptial agreement. We need to see if that holds up in court." Maria's brow furrowed. "We had a prenup, but it was signed before his empire expanded like this. Back then, he had almost nothing. I never thought it would come to this." Patrick flipped through documents. "Yes, it's from 15 years ago, but we have grounds to challenge it if certain conditions have changed significantly, or if you can prove undue influence or anything along those lines. After all, you supported him morally and even financially in the early years." Jennifer chimed in, "Don't forget about the potential hidden offshore accounts. Rumors are swirling that he might be moving investments to the Cayman Islands." Maria felt her insides twist. Every layer of betrayal deepened her resolve. "Let's do whatever it takes. I don't want to be cruel. I just want what's fair. But if Jacob tries to shortchange me after all I've done to help him, then I'm ready to fight." Patrick gave a firm nod. "I'll coordinate with your investigator, Richard Pine. We'll uncover any hidden income streams or suspicious accounts. In the meantime, you need to remain calm. These next few weeks will be a roller coaster." Maria exhaled. She glanced at Jennifer, who squeezed her hand. This was war, and she was prepared. Late one night, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She tapped it open and saw, "I have information about Annalise. Meet me at Calderwood Cafe, 9 am tomorrow. R.P. Richard Pine." She felt a rush of anticipation. The next morning she arrived at the cozy Calderwood Cafe, known for its artisanal pastries and discreet atmosphere. Richard sat at a corner table, leafing through a manila folder. Maria slid into the chair opposite him. "So, what have you found?" Richard leaned forward, voice low. "Quite a bit, actually. Annalise Winslow is from Los Angeles. That much is true. She started off as a pageant contestant in her teens, then moved into small-time modeling gigs, mostly promotional events. After that, she tried to break into Hollywood. She had a few minor roles, nothing significant." Maria listened intently as Richard continued. "She married briefly at 19 to a man named Parker Bloom, an older talent manager. The marriage lasted less than a year, and she walked away with a sizable alimony settlement, allegations of emotional abuse from both sides, but nothing proven. After that, she moved to New York around 3 years ago. She's been living in high-end apartments, though it's unclear how she's been affording them." "So she's a gold digger," Maria muttered, disgust curling in her stomach. Richard shrugged. "She's adept at finding wealthy men, that much is clear. And from phone records I accessed, it seems she was seeing Jacob for at least a year before you caught them." Maria's chest clenched. A year. She felt her hands tremble momentarily. For a year, her husband had been living a double life, Go on, she prompted, forcing composure. Her finances are shaky. She maintains appearances, but she's leveraged with credit card debt, living off gifts from older boyfriends. I also found something else, some suspicion that she was previously connected to a money laundering scheme, though nothing concrete enough for an arrest. She's cunning. She knows how to navigate the wealthy circles and keep her secrets hidden. Maria's mind spun. She pictured Annalise draped on Jacob's arm, whispering sweet words to him while systematically securing her future with his money. This was no mere fling. This was a calculated move by an opportunist. It didn't absolve Jacob. He was equally to blame, a grown man who should have seen the red flags. But it changed how Maria viewed the dynamic. "How can I use this information?" she asked. Richard folded his hands. "Your legal team can introduce this as evidence that Annalise might be pushing Jacob to move assets, or that she might have a questionable background that affects the case. While it doesn't directly influence your divorce settlement, it can shed light on Jacob's credibility and motives." Maria nodded slowly. "Thank you, Richard. This is incredibly helpful." She closed the folder, feeling her spirits lift for a moment. This was more than just heartbreak. Now it was a mission to protect herself from two cunning players. She had let love blind her to Jacob's changes, but she would not let it blind her to her own future. While the divorce proceedings were set in motion, Jacob Delgado faced a crisis of his own. The Delgado Holdings Board of Directors had caught wind of the scandal. The reason? A major investor, Keiji Nakamura, who had planned to pour hundreds of millions into Delgado Holdings' new project, was now hesitant. The fiasco with Jacob's personal life signaled instability at the helm, and big money despises instability. A week later, in the elegant conference room at Delgado Holdings headquarters, Jacob was grilled by the board. The walls were lined with modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. But the tension inside was palpable. Men and women in suits, representing some of the largest financial institutions, demanded answers. Board member Regina Charles, a tough-as-nails executive with silver-streaked hair, eyed Jacob coldly. "We're not here to judge your personal decisions," she began, "but your behavior is affecting our business." Mr. Nakamura is spooked. He stalled negotiations because he doesn't like the negative press associated with your, shall we say, public affair. Jacob attempted a confident posture. "We can handle this," he said. "Nakamura's concerns are about the stability of the company. I can assure you Delgado Holdings is stronger than ever." Regina's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Your wife, Maria Delgado, has been a visible figure at charitable events linked to this company. She was involved, albeit unofficially, in several philanthropic partnerships. Her departure in such a scandalous way raises questions. We need to ensure no crisis of confidence escalates." Jacob felt his insides tighten. The narrative was twisting. Maria was no longer just his wife. She was an extension of the brand he had built. He stifled the desire to lash out at the board's insinuation that his personal life was fair game. "Instead," he insisted, "I'm working on controlling the narrative. We'll handle the press. And as for Maria, once the divorce is settled, we can present a unified, amicable front." Regina's lips formed a thin line. "Jacob, we hired a PR team. They've strongly advised that we do damage control before the next shareholders' meeting. That might involve statements from both you and Maria, something to quell rumors of a messy divorce that could sabotage investor confidence. Besides, have you considered the ramifications if Miss Delgado takes you to the cleaners financially?" Jacob's frustration peaked. "I have attorneys for that," he snapped. "We'll handle it." The rest of the board members exchanged looks. One of them, Arnold Powell, tried to lighten the tone. "Look, we just need reassurance that Delgado Holdings won't implode from a personal scandal." If you can't get it under control, we might have to explore leadership changes. That was the ultimate threat, a coup at his own company. Jacob forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. There will be no need for that. Trust me. As the meeting adjourned, Jacob was left alone for a moment. His reflection in the glossy surface of the boardroom table looked older, more stressed. He thought of Maria's eyes the last time he saw her, brimming with betrayal. Then he thought of Annalise, upset with the negative attention. For the first time, he questioned if the precarious web he'd spun was worth the cost. But it was too late. The avalanche had already begun. In a twist that neither Maria nor Jacob could have predicted, help came from an unexpected quarter, Jacob's estranged sister, Daniela Delgado. She had parted ways with the family years earlier, after disagreeing with Jacob on a major business decision that led to a bitter falling out. Since then, Daniela had built her own path, creating a successful interior design firm. She'd always admired Maria's kindness from afar and held contempt for Jacob's ruthless ambition. Out of the blue, Daniela reached out to Maria. She called one evening while Maria was reviewing documents with Jennifer. "Maria, this is Daniela, Jacob's sister." Maria's initial shock shifted into curiosity. "Yes, Daniela. The first remember you. We haven't spoken in ages." "Look," Daniela said, "I heard about what happened. I don't blame you if you don't want to talk. But I have information about a couple of major real estate deals. Jacob's been working on things that might be relevant to your divorce. If you're interested, meet me at the Silverwood Lounge tomorrow night at 8. Maria hesitated. Jacob had mentioned Daniela only rarely, and it was always laced with bitterness. Yet something told her Daniela might be sincere. "I'll be there," she said, surprising even herself. The next night, Maria walked into the Silverwood Lounge, a chic bar with velvet drapes and soft jazz music. Daniela, a petite woman with sharp features, waved from a corner booth. She wore a stylish black suit and maintained a guarded expression. "Thank you for meeting me," Daniela said, offering a polite nod as Maria sat down. Maria studied Jacob's sister. "I'm surprised you reached out. Jacob never said good things about you." Daniela smirked. "Likewise. He painted you as the obedient wife who turned a blind eye to his shadier deals. But I knew that wasn't you. We might not have been close, but I always saw your kindness." Now, about his real estate dealings. She opened her handbag and pulled out a USB drive. These are documents that point to a series of shell companies linked to Delgado Holdings. I suspect he's been funneling money offshore. Years back, he tried to get me to help launder funds through interior design contracts. I refused, and that's partly why we fell out. He threatened me to keep quiet. Maria's eyes widened. She carefully took the USB drive. If these documents were legitimate, they could be a game changer. "Why help me now?" Daniela's eyes flickered with something akin to regret. "Because Jacob's arrogance has gone too far. He's forgotten family loyalty and moral boundaries. If he wants to destroy you, the one decent aspect of his life, I won't stand for it. And, to be transparent, I want him to face consequences for all the times he's bullied and blackmailed anyone who stood in his way." Maria tucked the USB drive into her purse. She studied Daniela carefully, trying to gauge sincerity. "Thank you," she said eventually. "I'll have my lawyer look at this. I appreciate your honesty." Daniela gave a single nod. "Just be careful. He'll retaliate if he feels cornered. Jacob Delgado is still my brother, and I know what he's capable of." Fear nudged at Maria's heart, but it was overshadowed by her determination. She swore to herself that she wouldn't let fear rule her anymore. Jacob had shattered her trust and flaunted his betrayal in a way that threatened her entire future. She wouldn't stand idly by. While Maria gathered information, Annalise Winslow was not idle. She realized Jacob was in a precarious position. The negative press, the board's dissatisfaction, and now the looming divorce threatened to erode the luxurious future she had counted on. In whispered phone calls, she pressed Jacob to finalize their engagement, to secure her name in the Delgado fortune before it slipped away. Yet Jacob delayed, promising to fix everything first. Uncertain of Jacob's ability to protect her interests, Annalise took matters into her own hands. She arranged a private lunch with one of Jacob's longtime associates, a banker named Charles Montclair. He was known to handle offshore transactions for Delgado Holdings. At a chic bistro on the Upper East Side, she met Charles in a secluded corner. "Jacob trusts you, right?" she asked, swirling her wineglass. She wore a designer dress, exuding confidence, even though her heart pounded with nerves. Charles nodded slowly. "We've done business together for years." Annalise leaned forward, letting her voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Good, because I want to guarantee that if things go south, I'm protected." Charles raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order." Jacob keeps his financial dealings close to the vest. A sly smile tugged at Annalise's lips. "I'm sure he does. But I also know Delgado Holdings is possibly moving money in ways that aren't entirely above board. If you help me get a piece of the pie quietly, I'll make it worth your while. I have connections in L.A. that might interest you." Charles swallowed. He was no stranger to morally dubious requests, but this was bolder than most. Still, money talked. "What do you propose?" "I propose you set me up with an offshore account. A small percentage of whatever Jacob moves. I don't care if it's 1 million or 10 million, as long as I have something to fall back on. In return, I'll keep my mouth shut if the authorities come knocking." Charles looked uneasy. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. This could be risky. "But I'll see what I can do." Annalise nodded, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. She felt a thrill at the prospect of securing her own fortune. She was tired of waiting for Jacob to deliver. If he was going to let his empire crumble, she'd salvage what she could. The divorce proceedings accelerated. Under the scrutiny of Patrick Hodges, Jacob's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They argued that the prenuptial agreement limited Maria's entitlement to a fraction of the current fortune. But Patrick introduced evidence that Maria's early support had directly facilitated Jacob's meteoric rise. Financial experts testified about intangible contributions, spousal support, and the validity of a prenup signed under potentially misleading circumstances. Behind closed doors, settlement negotiations were intense. One afternoon, in a wood-paneled conference room in the courthouse, Maria and Jacob faced each other while their lawyers sparred over details. The tension was suffocating. Jacob's lead attorney, Garrett Rhodes, glared over his wire-rimmed glasses. "My client is offering a significant settlement, $20 million. That's more than generous, given the prenuptial agreement." Maria's lawyer, Patrick, shot back. $20 million is a pittance compared to the Delgado empire. "My client deserves equitable distribution, especially in light of the new evidence we'll be presenting about hidden assets." Garrett stiffened. "What evidence?" Patrick laid out the file containing Daniela's USB drive findings, shell companies, suspicious transfers, and potential tax evasion. Maria noticed Jacob's face flush with anger. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. "If you don't want the courts delving into these matters," Patrick said calmly, "it would be wise to offer a fair settlement and quickly." Garrett looked to Jacob, who cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous," Jacob muttered. "Maria, we can handle this privately. Let's not blow up everything we built." Maria's anger flared. "We didn't build anything together anymore, Jacob. You destroyed that. I just want what I'm legally entitled to. Nothing less." Before Jacob could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, features hardening. "Excuse me," he said, rising and stepping outside. Maria exchanged a look with her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. She felt a pang in her chest, remembering the man she once loved, but she'd come too far to yield. Moments later, Jacob returned, face grim. "There's a situation at Delgado Holdings. I need to attend to it. We'll resume this later." He left with Garrett, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Patrick exhaled and turned to Maria. "He's rattled. That's good. But we need to keep the pressure on." She nodded, her mind swirling with possibilities. Jacob had always thrived under pressure, but this was a new realm of stress, public scandal, board dissatisfaction, a vengeful sister revealing his secrets, a cunning mistress, and a betrayed wife fighting back. If anyone understood the Empire's vulnerability, it was Maria, and now she had no reason to protect it. Jacob discovered what the phone call was about. Keiji Nakamura had officially withdrawn his large investment due to the ongoing negative publicity and internal instability at Delgado Holdings. The blow was catastrophic. Stocks dipped, the board was livid, rumors of a hostile takeover circulated. Jacob's once iron grip on his empire was loosening. In the days that followed, tabloids feasted on fresh gossip. Leaked whispers suggested that Jacob's mistress was demanding a rush wedding and that the Delgado board was considering a forced resignation if the crisis continued. Jacob's face, once glowing with ambition, now appeared haggard. The carefully curated facade of success was crumbling faster than he could salvage it. At Annalise's insistence, Jacob tried to offer her a lavish ceremony in some exotic locale, hoping a quick marriage might quell some rumors and secure her unwavering support. But the board frowned at any attempt that would further sensationalize his personal life. An internal power struggle erupted, with some directors pressuring Jacob to step down temporarily. Regina Charles especially had sharpened her stance, aligning with a faction that believed Delgado Holdings needed a new figurehead to reassure investors. In a desperate bid to maintain control, Jacob made a public statement. Cameras flashed as he stepped before a cluster of reporters outside the Delgado Holdings headquarters. He wore a dark suit, face set in an expression of forced calm. "I would like to address recent speculations regarding my personal life," he began, voice subdued. "I am currently going through a divorce process, and I request privacy and respect during this challenging time. Delgado Holdings remains strong, and we are fully committed to our ongoing projects. The unfortunate withdrawal of Mr. Nakamura's investment does not diminish our stability." He continued with corporate platitudes, but the reporters clamored for more personal answers. "What about the mistress? Are you engaged already?" one asked. Jacob ignored it, reading from his carefully prepared statement. But the damage was done. In the public's eye, he was the faithless millionaire with something to hide. Watching the coverage from Jennifer's townhouse, Maria felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had loved that man once. Now he was a stranger, fighting to keep illusions intact. But illusions always come at a price. She reminded herself of that truth. As the divorce hearing approached, tension reached a fever pitch. Patrick Hodges received a call from Garrett Rhodes, requesting a private meeting, just the lawyers and their clients, with no media or court officials. Maria and Jennifer drove to the law firm's office, hearts pounding. They were ushered into a sleek conference room. Jacob, Garrett, Patrick, and a stone-faced Annalise were already seated around a polished table. Maria ignored the pang of seeing Annalise by Jacob's side. She focused on the fact that the mistress's presence was highly unusual in a divorce negotiation. Garrett cleared his throat. "We've come with a proposition, Mr. Delgado is prepared to offer a settlement of $100 million plus the Manhattan penthouse in exchange for Miss Delgado signing a non-disclosure agreement, no further revelations about Delgado Holdings or Mr. Delgado's personal affairs." We want to handle this quietly and move on. Maria's eyes flickered. 100 million was vastly larger than the initial offer. She glanced at Patrick, who gave a subtle nod, indicating it was a substantial proposition. Yet something felt off. Her gaze slid to Annalise, who looked uncharacteristically tense. Patrick spoke up. "It's a generous offer, but we need to verify if there are no further conditions. Also, the NDA's scope must be clarified. Miss Delgado has the right to discuss her personal experiences freely." Jacob cut in, voice sharp. "I don't want my ex-wife airing dirty laundry. We sign this. We end it. Maria, you go your way, I go mine." Maria's heart raced. 100 million could secure her future, free her from the stress, and let her start anew. It was a fortune beyond her wildest imagination back when they were newlyweds sharing cheap takeout. But then her gaze settled on Annalise, who avoided eye contact. Maria recalled the shady deals and the knowledge that Delgado Holdings was unraveling behind the scenes. She realized that if she accepted the offer blindly, she might be stepping into a trap, allowing Jacob to cover up potential crimes and injustice. She licked her lips, choosing her words carefully. "Jacob, I appreciate the offer, but I won't sign anything until I'm sure you're not hiding more. I don't need your hush money if it means letting you and Annalise ruin more lives." Anger flashed in Jacob's eyes. "You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment. Think of what 100 million can do for you." Annalise finally spoke, voice hesitant. "Maria, please. There's no need to drag this out. We can all walk away with dignity." Maria almost laughed at the irony of Annalise talking about dignity. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering the heartbreak of that night at Belafonte's. Then she thought of the fear and manipulation that might still lurk if she let Jacob walk away scot-free. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I'm not making a decision today." Garrett, Jacob's lawyer, looked frustrated. "We need an answer soon. Otherwise, we proceed to court." "Then we proceed to court," Patrick replied calmly. "We'll see you there." The tension was palpable as they stood to leave. Jacob locked eyes with Maria. "Don't do this," he said softly, an echo of the old Jacob appearing for a split second. "We can solve this quietly." She met his gaze, seeing the man she once loved drowned out by layers of betrayal. "If you had wanted things quiet, you wouldn't have proposed to your mistress in a public place." The day of the official court hearing dawned cloudy and brisk. Photographers and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Maria arrived with Patrick, Jennifer, and a small security detail. Whispers followed her. She was no longer just a betrayed wife, she was the woman who might topple a millionaire's empire. Rumors swirled that she possessed damning evidence of fraud. Jacob and Annalise arrived separately, escorted by their own legal team. People craned their necks to catch a glimpse, cameras clicking furiously. He looked tense, shoulders stiff under his tailored suit. Annalise kept her chin high, though she lingered behind Jacob, as if wary of the scrutiny. Inside the large, wood-paneled courtroom, the judge, a stern woman named Honorable Denise Faraday, called the session to order. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. On the surface, it was a high-profile divorce, but in reality, it was a battleground for corporate secrets, personal vengeance, and heartbreak. Patrick presented Maria's case with meticulous detail, her contributions to Jacob's early success, the suspicious financial maneuvers uncovered by Daniela and Richard Pine, and the emotional distress caused by Jacob's public betrayal. Garrett rebutted by citing the prenup, painting Maria as vengeful, seeking more than she deserved. Midway through the proceedings, Patrick introduced a surprise witness, Daniela Delgado. She stepped forward, looking poised and determined. Her testimony about Jacob's shell companies, backed by email chains and financial documents, sent waves of shock through the courtroom. The tension climbed higher when she revealed that she had confronted Jacob years ago about money laundering allegations, which he had vehemently denied. When cross-examined by Garrett, Daniela stayed firm. "I have no reason to lie," she said quietly, "other than to expose wrongdoing. My brother has threatened me, but I won't be silent anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob's face was a mask of barely contained fury. For Maria, hearing Daniela stand up for the truth was both validating and heartbreaking. This was the family she once thought she had. Then it was Annalise's turn on the stand. She was visibly nervous, glancing repeatedly at Jacob for reassurance. Under Patrick's probing questions, she admitted to the affair, to Jacob's promises of marriage, but denied any knowledge of financial misconduct. She played the part of the innocent lover, insisting she merely fell in love with a man who claimed he was divorcing his wife. Patrick pressed, "Did Mr. Delgado ever mention, even indirectly, wanting to shift funds out of the country, presumably to protect them from the plaintiff?" Annalise hesitated, swallowing hard. "Not in so many words," she finally said. He mentioned wanting to make sure his money was secure." That small admission sent a ripple through the courtroom. Jacob's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. By the time Annalise stepped down, sweat dotted her brow. She cast a fleeting glance at Jacob, who looked away. After a tense lunch recess, the court reconvened. Garrett strode to the center, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Your Honor, we have newly obtained evidence regarding Miss Delgado's own financial history, specifically questionable transactions in her name that raise concerns about her credibility." A hush descended. Maria's heart skipped. She had no idea what they were referring to. She quickly glanced at Patrick, who looked equally puzzled. Jennifer furrowed her brow. Could Jacob's legal team have found something contrived to discredit Maria? Garrett projected documents onto a screen. They showed wire transfers from an account titled M. Delgado to a bank in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were substantial, several $1 million. Maria was dumbfounded. She had never seen those transactions. "This is absurd," Patrick hissed. "Miss Delgado has no knowledge of these accounts. They must be fabricated," but Garrett pressed on. "Nevertheless, these documents indicate that Miss Delgado might have known about offshore practices and even participated in them. We must question her integrity and motivations." Maria's stomach churned. She realized this was a smear tactic, orchestrated to paint her as complicit or hypocritical. But how had they manufactured these records? The judge frowned, calling for order. "Miss Delgado," she addressed Maria, "do you have any knowledge of these transactions?" Maria stood, voice trembling but resolute. "None whatsoever, Your Honor. This is the first I've seen of these so-called documents. I suspect they're part of a scheme by Mr. Delgado to undermine my case." Jacob's eyes flicked toward her. Was there a flicker of regret, or just determination to win at any cost? The judge instructed further examination of the evidence, and recess was called for the day. The media outside went wild, speculating on whether Maria was truly innocent or had skeletons in her closet. That evening, as Maria regrouped with her team, she tried to steady her nerves. Jennifer cursed Jacob's low blow. Patrick immediately launched an investigation into the suspicious documents, suspecting they were forged or manipulated. Meanwhile, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard Pine. "Meet me at my office tomorrow at 7 a.m. I might have found something that can flip this around." Tension thrummed within her. She realized that she was dancing on the edge of a high-stakes game, one where illusions could be crafted and destroyed in an instant. She also sensed that if she didn't play her cards right, she could lose everything. The next morning, Maria arrived at Richard Pine's unremarkable office building in Chelsea. In a modest but tidy workspace, he greeted her with a firm handshake. On his desk, he had a laptop open to a complicated spreadsheet of IP addresses and account details. "I suspected those documents introduced in court were forged," he began without preamble. "So I did a deep dive into the digital metadata of the wire transfers. Every time a wire transfer is done, there's an electronic fingerprint. Long story short, the documents we saw in court have anomalies that suggest they were fabricated." Maria felt a surge of relief but also anger at Jacob's treachery. "So it's definitely fake," Richard nodded. "Yes, and I have proof. The IP addresses associated with these transactions trace back to a shell company that's linked to Delgado Holdings. The digital watermark indicates the documents were created using a specific software license registered to that same shell company. In simpler terms, it was an inside job." Maria exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She wanted to hug Richard, but she settled for gripping his arm. "This is exactly what we need. With this, we can prove they tried to frame me." Richard offered a faint smile. "Be careful. Jacob's cornered, and cornered people can be unpredictable. But yes, this should be enough to dismantle their smear campaign." Armed with this new evidence, Maria returned to the courthouse. Patrick introduced Richard Pine's findings, systematically debunking the false documents. The judge was furious at the apparent attempt to mislead the court. Garrett stammered that they'd obtained the documents from an anonymous source and had no knowledge of the forgery. Jacob looked livid, glancing at Annalise, who stared at the floor. The judge sternly reminded all parties that perjury and tampering with evidence carried severe consequences. In a decisive moment, she ordered a full forensic audit of Delgado Holdings accounts. That spelled disaster for Jacob, who had spent years carefully disguising questionable dealings. It was the final straw that cracked his empire's shell wide open. When the courtroom resumed, Maria's legal team presented ironclad evidence that the so-called Cayman Islands bank statements in her name were forged. Metadata traced them back to a shell company tied to Delgado Holdings, proving Jacob's team had fabricated documents to discredit her. Furious at the deception, the judge ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all Delgado Holdings accounts. Within days, the company's stock nosedived as investors panicked and board members blamed Jacob for the ensuing scandal. Facing mounting pressure, they forced him to step down as CEO, leaving him humiliated and struggling to salvage his reputation. Simultaneously, Maria's divorce proceedings reached a turning point. Recognizing he was cornered by the damning audit and under threat of a potential criminal investigation, Jacob instructed his lawyer to extend a vastly improved settlement offer. Instead of the nominal amounts initially proposed, Maria now stood to receive $200 million, a portfolio of properties including the Manhattan penthouse, and an official acknowledgement of Jacob's wrongdoing. Crucially, the settlement would also include his public apology for using forged evidence against her. Desperate to minimize further legal liabilities and public shame, Jacob surrendered to every condition, though he seethed at the outcome. On the day the final documents were signed, Jacob approached Maria in the courthouse hallway, offering a halting apology that acknowledged his betrayal and, beneath that, his regret at how spectacularly he had destroyed their shared dreams. Maria accepted his words without malice, though the bond they'd once shared was irrevocably severed. Annalise Winslow did not appear. Rumors suggested she was already planning her exit, unwilling to remain at Jacob's side now that his empire was in shambles. With the divorce finalized, Maria stepped away from the chaos. Though she walked away with more money than she'd ever imagined, she remained grounded by the values her parents had instilled in her. Resolving to use her resources for good, she founded an organization to assist women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, separation, or financial struggles. Daniela, Jacob's sister, became a staunch supporter. Together, they furnished the charity's new office, forging a friendship born of mutual respect rather than shared loyalty to Jacob. Jacob's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale in Manhattan's elite circles, a parable of unchecked ambition leading to ruin. Free from his shadow, Maria embraced her next chapter on her own terms, moving into a modern penthouse across town, a space she chose herself. Not out of obligation, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Gazing at the skyline one late afternoon, she allowed the crisp air to fill her lungs, contemplating the journey that had challenged her faith in love and trust. Yet, in rising from the rubble, Maria discovered a powerful truth. Broken dreams could serve as the foundation for a more genuine, self-determined future. In the end, she transformed a devastating betrayal into an unbreakable will, resolved to live fully and authentically. Her story, an enduring testament to resilience and renewal. And there you have it, the twists and turns of Maria Delgado's remarkable journey from unsuspecting wife to triumphant phoenix. She discovered the power of self-reinvention in the face of heartbreak and high-stakes drama, proving that even the deepest betrayals can ignite a fierce determination to rise. Jacob Delgado's downfall and Annalise Winslow's vanishing act became cautionary tales whispered throughout Manhattan's elite circles, while Maria's name was etched into the city's lore as a resilient survivor who refused to back down. She built a new life that honored her past, but never allowed it to define her future.